Well, thank you, Katie, for that reading and for your sermon title, Growing Up. It's a great topic for me today on a day when my dad's visiting. But I think it's probably fortunate that this particular Bible text didn't come in the lectionary on either Mother's Day or Father's Day. Can you imagine that? It's hard to believe that Jesus would say these words, "For I have come to set a man against his father and a daughter against her mother." How can we imagine the Prince of Peace saying, "I have not come to bring peace, but a sword"? In Luke's version of this text in chapter 12, Jesus' words are a little softer. He just says he's come to bring division. But in Mark, he's even more violent. In Mark chapter 13, Jesus quotes the prophets Zephaniah and Daniel on the coming end of the world, the day of the Lord. He warns the disciples about persecutions to come. He says, "Brother will betray brother to death, and a father against his child. And children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name." It makes you wonder why they call it the good news, doesn't it? I suppose it's good news if misery loves company, since every family has conflict. Family conflict is a big part of growing up. And if you don't believe me, you can ask my father or my kids. In the church where I was confirmed back in North Carolina, I was visiting one time when the father of one of my friends from Sunday school and youth group came up to me and started to complain to me about his daughter. She had moved to London's East End to work as a missionary with her husband and family. But her dad thought it was very wrong of her to take away his grandchildren. And I so admired their work there with the poor and their courage, I was kind of astonished that he, as a lifelong Christian, would condemn them. Plus, it made me feel horrible since I had been conducting my entire ministry with a continent between me and my parents. Still, I took some comfort in this scripture, that the Bible makes it clear that Jesus was all about separating from family, joining a new family of God, the family of Christ, whether in the church or out on the road. Discipleship has never been about settling down and getting your family's approval. Jesus knew this perhaps more than anyone, and that's what this text today is about. The trouble we may make for ourselves and our families if we are to grow up into the fullness of life Christ offers and to truly follow Jesus. You might be surprised at the way Jesus treated his own family because he's often disrespectful and even rude to them. Later in the book of Matthew, we read in chapter 12, "While Jesus was still speaking to the crowds, his mother and his brothers were standing outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, 'Look, your mother and your brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you.' But to the one who told him this, Jesus replied, 'Who is my mother? And who are my brothers?' And pointing to his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father is my brother and my sister and mother.'" So Jesus did not promote traditional family values in the way you might think. Since the one Jesus called his own father, Joseph, disappears from the biblical story after Jesus' childhood, we might guess that it wouldn't have been easy for Mary to raise her family alone. Jesus knew how hard things could be in his culture for the widows and orphans, the ones that the prophets always preached that the family of faith should support. So Jesus set out to break apart the patriarchal system of the ancient world where obedience to the father was everything. It was the whole foundation of society. In ancient law, a man could divorce his wife and just set her aside for any reason, leaving her to remarry perhaps or go back to her father if she was lucky. But if she was not so lucky, she might be left alone to starve, to beg, to be a prostitute. And that's why when Jesus speaks out against divorce, for instance, he is really acting like a feminist in defending women's rights to be protected. In many places, a father could even have his members of his family put to death on his word without the benefit of trial. So in this context, for Jesus to name God as Father has a lot less to do with the gender of God and a whole lot more to do with undermining the power of earthly fathers and uniting the people of faith into one human family. You may remember what Jesus said about fathers also later in Matthew in chapter 23. He says, "Call no one your father on earth, for you have but one Father, the one in heaven." And I was thinking in many ways, this is what growing up is all about. Leaving your father and mother and relying on God for wisdom and guidance instead. Joining with the faith and family of Christ's church. I don't know about you, but I have many adopted mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in the church. So to pray our Father is to submit ourselves to a new covenant for living and to join a new family of faith. To pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," is both a prayer to God and, I think, a courageous response to the Great Commission of Jesus. Christians are called by Jesus to be prophetic. So we remember that for Jesus, righteousness meant taking that prophetic and unpopular path, not just being righteous like the Pharisees and doing religious obligation. So if Christians choose to take up the cross and follow Jesus, we shouldn't expect that our life will be easy. Remember that at the end of today's reading, when Jesus talks about receiving a prophet's reward or the reward of the righteous for welcoming a prophet or welcoming a righteous person, that reward may not necessarily be such a good thing. You remember the reward that was given to St. John the Baptist, the one who proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah? His reward was to have his head served up to King Herod's wife